네, 그럼 휴식을 마무리하고 저희는 네 번째 세션 이어가 보도록 하겠습니다. 코비드-19 팬데믹을 경험하면서 참 많은 신조어들이 등장을 했습니다. 새로운 환경 그리고 새로운 기술에 적응하고 있는 요즘이지만 가장 많은 변화를 겪고 있는 곳이 바로 우리 학교가 아닐까 하는 생각이 듭니다. 입학과 동시에 코비드-19 팬데믹을 경험하면서 학교를 제대로 가보지 못한 학번들도 있는데요. 전 세계가 함께 겪고 있는 문제이기도 합니다. 우리 다양한 국가의 청년들은 어떻게 생각을 하고 있을지 지금부터 하나하나 들어보도록 하죠. 자, 이번 세션은 코로나 학번 팬데믹의 현재와 미래를 주제로 이야기 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 좌장께서 공동으로 진행을 해주시겠는데요. 고려대학교 김선혁 교수님 그리고 국민대학교 홍미화 조 교수님께서 공동 좌장으로 함께해 주시겠습니다. 아울러 8분의 패널 분들께서 지금 단상을 가득 채워주고 계십니다. 자, 2분 좌장님 그리고 8분의 패널 분들까지 단상에 나와 계신데요. 지금부터 시작해 보겠습니다. 여러분 뜨거운 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 좌장님 부탁드리겠습니다.
Welcome to Youth Session 4 entitled Class of COVID-19, the Present and Future of the Pandemic. This is a special session organized by Korea Foundation for Advanced Studies, KFAS. My name is Sunhyuk Kim, and I'm a professor in the Department of Public Administration at Korea University. I'm very delighted to chair this session. KFAS, the organizer of this session, is a nonprofit organization established in 1974 by the late chairman Choi Jong-hyun of SK Group to promote Korea's growth through academic development, particularly via cultivating world-class scholars. Since its establishment, KFAS has been a leading scholarship foundation in Korea, but now, since last September, a leadership change last fall, KFAS is now expanding its activities, aspiring to make a premier educational academic exchange institution as well as a major think tank in Korea and in the world, specialized in global leadership and citizenship mentoring and training programs. Now let me turn to the session. Obviously, COVID-19 is an unprecedented, colossal calamity for the entire humanity. But as such, it has galvanized many scholarly, policy, and public debates. So far, most of the debates have been focused on the impact of the pandemic and prospects and prescriptions for the future. In this session, we are reprobing these critical topics of the time. What distinguishes this session is the makeup of our presenters. As a highly globalized country, Korea proudly features already sizable and ever-growing community of international students. The number of international students studying in Korea is more than 160,000 as of 2019, and KFAS has decided to support and tap into this very special segment of the population of increasingly globalized and multicultural Korea. The 8 speakers of this session are all university students, and 7 of them are from abroad, taking advantage of their unique experiences as international students studying in Korea and as global citizens capable of comparing Korea and their home countries. The speakers will address the present and future of the pandemic in the areas of mental health, education, government, and social activism. I have no doubt this session will greatly contribute to transforming Korea into a more globalized, multicultural, and ultimately more democratic country. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the presentations. The first theme is mental health. First, Ms. Maya Banowati RAHMAWAN from Indonesia, who is currently studying chemical and biological engineering at Seoul National University, will present on the impact of COVID-19 on mental health. Let's welcome her.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start my presentation, I have a question. So, how are you doing throughout this pandemic? Throughout the pandemic, severe social and psychological challenges have created unprecedented individual societal issues. From new normal, social distancing, distance learning, work from home, you name it. Those things influence our mental health. Now, let us take a look at the impacts. First, let me share my experience. I'm an extrovert. I really like to do some kind of group studying. It is really the way to go for me. It helps with my academic performance. But now, that's taken away from me. I can see my grades giving the example of free fall motion that we see in physics. Since the onset of the pandemic, the rhythm of our daily life have changed. I'm stuck in this monotonous loop. I wake up, I open my laptop, take my class, do my assignments, and then go back to sleep, and repeat this whole loop again for days and days and days. It was fine, it was all right, but as time goes, the pandemic fatigue hits me really hard. Also, the restriction of the COVID-19 and the social distancing triggers stress more than the fear of the pandemic itself stresses us. And actually, as an international student, the worst part is I haven't gone home for 2 years. I feel so not motivated. And, it's so heartbreaking. You can't see your number one support system for this long. And now let's turn our perspective to statistical perspective on the impact of COVID-19 on mental health. This is a study done by KFF on January 2021, which results 60% of the young adult report symptoms of anxiety and or depression. And also, among college students, 20% of college students say their mental health has significantly worsened under COVID-19. Meanwhile, here in Korea, 23% of the population are in the depression risk groups. This might be a small number, okay, but then it's actually sixfold of the number compared to 2018, before the pandemic. This is really a serious issue that we need to address and we need to be aware of. And then this term might be new for you, microlosses. So the accumulation of microlosses, such as online classes, cancellation of graduation, or even unstable job market, has led to a far more substantial impact to young adults' mental health. Next is the focus to students, the impacts on students. The study done by Texas A&M University in 2020 found out that 89% of us face difficulty in concentration, 86 of us face disruptions to sleeping patterns, 82 of us faces increased concerns on academic performance. And also, lastly, 86 of us experience decrease in social interactions. However, for our generations, social media plays a big role in our daily life. It is the only lifeline to the outside world during the quarantine or even during the pandemic. But this causes social anxiety due to the negative consequences of the social media. Here's the real problem that we face. 50% of us don't know where to seek for help regarding our mental health. More than half of us is lost in this mental health pandemic. Here's a reminder. Don't blame yourself for suffering from the inevitable repercussions of COVID-19. Regular depression can develop into clinical depression. When I address myself to the cost of the problem. This mindset leads to pathological anxiety and anger. So, how can you manage such an anger and stress? First, try to surround yourself with the minimum number of people that you can do. It doesn't matter whether it's like only 10 or only, oh, can we do 10? Probably can 4 or 3, that's fine. Or also you can try virtual face-to-face. I tried it before during my finals and midterm session. So we had our cameras on during Zoom meeting without our microphone on. So it felt like the real group meeting study. And then a next one, dear school, please go easy on us. We won't be able to perform the same like we did before the pandemic. We're on a global pandemic, so please, we need your consideration also. And also, providing more student consultation service would help a lot for students. Lastly, please seek for professional help if you feel the situation is way too overwhelming. Let me emphasize on stigma to having mental illness. That stigma is dead. There is no room for the stigma regarding mental health, both for now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Our next presenter is Laura HERWIN from Australia. She's studying international studies at Korea University and will present on the future of mental health after the pandemic. Laura?
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. As you've just heard, mental health globally is declining. It is critical that we act now before mental health becomes the next global pandemic. Except for this time, there will be no amount of mask mandates, vaccines, or social distancing requirements that can help stop it. The pandemic saw the introduction of fear into daily life, spreading chaos among nations, leading to lockdowns, social distancing, worry, stress, illness, and death. The pandemic also saw the rise in mental illnesses such as anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and suicidal thoughts. Like millions of others, and potentially some of the people currently watching or listening to this presentation, I too have suffered from mental health issues related to COVID. Feelings of loneliness, depression, anxiety, and fear, highlighted and worsened by the pandemic. I too hope for nothing more than this nightmarish situation to end. However, unfortunately, our problems will not miraculously disappear once we conquer COVID-19. So, what does the likely future of mental health currently look like? As the pandemic has begun, people have begun to live in a perpetual state of fear just to get through daily life. Hence, it's safe to assume that the signs of trauma may not develop until the pandemic recedes or individuals begin to feel safe once again, whether that be in 2 months or 2 years. This makes it nearly impossible to predict the full extent of the pandemic will have on our mental health. However, professionals already predict that 10 to 15% of people's lives will not go back to normal once the pandemic is over due to mental health issues. Take a minute to let that sit in. That's 1 in every 10 people who will not be able to return to normal once the pandemic ends. And unfortunately, mental health will get worse before it gets better. And history has proven this to us over and over again. For example, if we take a look at the 2003 SARS pandemic, just over 1/3 of all patients who had the SARS disease went on to develop some form of PTSD. If we were to apply those same statistics to the current pandemic, it can be predicted that just under 55 million people currently globally will experience some form of PTSD within the near future. That's 0.7% of today's global population. The pandemic has also saw the dramatic rise in mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression due to continued social isolation. Additionally, experts already expect to see a huge spike in cases of OCD, as the pandemic is likely to trigger or worsen symptoms in individuals who are already genetically predisposed to the condition. Mental health will not only affect our society, but the economy as well. In my home country of Australia, it's already been predicted that depression will become the single largest mental health care burden by 2030. The Australian government already spends $33 million annually on suicide prevention and mental health. Additionally, mental health and mental illness will cost the global economy $16 trillion by 2030. It's critical that governments acknowledge these predictions and act now before this becomes an inevitable future which we must all live in. When beginning to write this presentation, I was asked to think of what future I would desire for mental health. And to put it simply, there's no one thing that could make the future perfect. That being said, I want to see a future where I don't have to second guess if it was really worth it to come up here today and talk about mental illness. I want to see a future where suicide rates are drastically decreasing because these individuals are getting the help and attention that they deserve. I want to see a future where mental health is no longer the enemy. I want to see a future where mental health is treated the same way as a common cold or a broken leg, where individuals can get the help and attention that they deserve and that they need. I want to see a society that not only survived the pandemic, but became stronger because of it. I want to see a world, a future, where nobody has to struggle alone. But the million-dollar question, as always, is, how can we make that happen? For my generation, it is critical that mental health be promoted both in and outside of schools and universities. And no, this does not just include a tiny footnote at the end of the syllabus by the professor stating that mental health is important, because we all know that already. It includes the introduction of mandatory lectures and seminars for both professors and students that teach the real warning signs of declining mental health and how and where to get the best help. As the pandemic moved us onto an online world when we could no longer see each other safely, mental illness has surged. However, there is one benefit of this. Healthcare providers have now invested more than ever into technology, and this includes the introduction of services such as telehealth that are currently helping millions of people across the globe. As a generation that is constantly connected to an online world, for both better or worse, it is critical that we make use of these technologies to our advantage. From apps that can help calm people down during a panic attack, to services that allow individuals to speak privately and anonymously to certified professionals, the digitalization of mental health is the future. Before I finish up, I just want to take a moment to reiterate what Maya mentioned. Because if there's one thing you take away from my presentation today, let it be this. There is no room for stigma of mental illness, both now and in the future. We must continue to stand together as a united front against the stigmatization of mental illness and continue to promote the normalization of speaking up and seeking help. In doing so, we stand a chance of creating a future that will benefit us all. Unfortunately, there will be no magical solution for the problems that we'll face once the pandemic is over. However, together, we can get through this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. We will now move on to the next theme of education. Mr. Dominick Wong is from Singapore, and he's studying business administration at Korea University. He will talk about the impact of the pandemic on education. Dominick?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominick, and today I'll be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on education. So before we delve into the impacts, let us take a trip down memory lane, as all of us were once students or are students at a time where we remembered what education and school life was like. So this is a scene in Germany where elementary students eat breakfast before starting their day. And this is an image of a teacher posing with his 11th grade students in South Africa. And this is an image of Korea University students graduating at the Supex Hall. So how has COVID-19 changed education? Now we see that in this image, social distancing is being observed at a local elementary school in South Korea. And in this image, we see that classrooms are empty as schools are mainly closed. And this is the new graduation. Now, the first impact that we believe is the closure of schools. Now, according to the International Labour Organization, it has affected 73% of youth, where 6% have experienced classes being cancelled, and 21% are continuing as per normal. Now, a gloomy and bleak outlook ensues amid this pandemic situation, where 51% believes that their studies will be delayed, 9% of young students believe that their education could fail, and 40% perceives future prospects with uncertainty and 14% with fear. Now, what are the implications of this then? There will be a decrease in the number of students, as some students choose to drop out of school for several different reasons. No doubt, there has always been a mismatch of skills needed by society and those gained in education. But this will widen due to COVID-19. There will also be an impact on school-to-work transition as students graduate later. This results in the issue of timing, as this means that organizations are not able to access the workforce and talent they need at the right time. And this has a huge social implication on a nation's ability in accessing competent, skilled, and educated workforce. If countries are not able to rely on their national workforce and have to deal with brain drain as well, their national development and competitive edge will be deeply affected. Another impact that we believe is the rapid shift to online learning. Now, there are a few fundamental differences when it comes to traditional and online learning. In traditional learning, as on the right, there is a fixed schedule and one has to commute to school to attend classes physically. With online learning, students have a more flexible schedule. However, this requires one to manage their time, be comfortable with using technology, and adapt to the new online learning environment. However, adapting to online environments is not the same for everyone. For less economically developed countries, digital and complementary infrastructure might be non-existent. The purchase of online devices might be not accessible for majority of the population, and electric power is not a necessity, but it's a luxury. And educators might not have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to support an online environment, or also adapt to the steep learning curve. Now, this is an image of a third grade class in Vietnam's Van Dong district that has no electricity or books. This results in widening inequality, digital divide, mismatch of skills needed and gained, and the illiteracy rate will increase for Vietnam. Now, another impact that we see is the effectiveness and quality of online classes. 65% of young people have reported learning less during the pandemic. Education is actually a two-way thing, and quality is dependent on how educators teach, but also how we students take responsibility for our own learning. Amid the pandemic, students had lacked the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and educators had also lacked the KSAs to also teach effectively, as there was a steep learning curve in utilizing technology to teach online. Also, both students and educators did not have time to adapt. Another factor is also the lack of optimization of technological tools to support and complement effective learning. Also, the absence of social contact and group work can also hinder learning to a certain extent. My friends, Maya and Naveen, are engineering students, and they say that their learning has been greatly affected because of the lack of a hands-on approach for certain engineering classes. And at the end of the day, amid COVID-19, I think the educational institutes needs to reflect on the trends and changing environment to be more in touch with what knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed in today's society to better equip humans to be successful with the necessary KSAs, but to also contribute to a more sustainable and innovative future. Now, graduation amid COVID-19 is something quite relevant to me because I'm going to be graduating in August. So as an undergraduate who will be graduating in August, it's not a great time to be in the job market. Companies are reevaluating the way they do business in an uncertain, dynamic, changing environment. Most companies are reducing their workforce amid cost-cutting measures, and they are not actively hiring too. Global unemployment has increased by 33 million in 2020, and the unemployment rate has hit a new global high of 6.5%. That means I will have to compete with competent, experienced professionals who are applying for the same jobs. And nowadays, the irony is that most job openings have a minimum requirement of 5 to 10 years. COVID-19 has also expedited the shift towards digitalization and placed an increasing importance on technology-related expertise. This has resulted in a change in KSAs being demanded in today's jobs. Also, most organizations nowadays are using artificial intelligence to screen their potential candidates. I do have a message for them. AI, artificial intelligence, is not the solution in finding great candidates. Sometimes the best candidates could be something that AI fails to recognize, such as the intangible aspect of being human. I also have a message for human resource departments of organizations who do not send rejection letters for job applications, but state that only shortlisted candidates will be contacted. Please revise your HR policies, as this is a rather lazy and insincere practice. At the end of the day, the proliferation of technology and innovation and advancements, we should not succumb to being lazy and lose our human touch, because that is what makes us great and unique as humans. You know, today I had the honor of having breakfast with President Che of KFAS. He mentioned something that I resonate strongly with. It used to be a race when humans work with machines, but nowadays, in a service-oriented economy, it is a race against the machines. To what extent are we going to let technology take over most of our jobs and become overly dependent on them, and we humans become irrelevant? That being said, I'm not against technology. I do embrace technology, but I believe there is a balance on how we use technology and not be so extreme in how we apply technology. Overall, amid COVID-19, I believe that it is important to be sensitive and to treat humans the way we want to be treated, as this pandemic has led to rather stressful times in our life. Yep. So thank you, and yep.
Thank you very much, Dominic. The next presenter is Mr. Naveen Rajan from India, who is studying electrical and computer engineering at Seoul National University. He will present on the future of education after the pandemic. Naveen?
Hello, everyone. I'll be presenting about the future of education post-COVID-19. COVID-19 has affected millions of students' lives, including students who are looking for employment. I'm pursuing my undergraduate studies in a time where it's pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, and I could clearly see how education was and how it should be designed in the future. In this session, I'll be presenting some important aspects of university students in particular and how we decide the prospects of education in the post-COVID era. COVID-19 has created a different approach of teaching method. Yes, I'm talking about online classes. Before COVID, most of the students, including me, would be very happy if professors go for a conference or meeting, as no classes would be held. But now, it's just a simple process of uploading a video. It's sad, isn't it? But jokes apart, our online classes proven to be effective. In my personal feeling, I feel that online classes have created both positive and negative impacts depending on the mindset of each individual. Let's discuss how online classes should be designed in the future. Being a student of Seoul National University is an adventure, but COVID-19 has made this adventure even more stressful. Professors, because of online classes, they gave more contents in a short span of time to study, and more homeworks and assignments are given than usual. Flipped learning method is used, where we have to watch videos before the actual class hours, and the problems are solved during the class hours, which makes almost double the time to listen to the lectures. Also, constantly asking emails through emails to the teaching assistants and professors are tiresome, and the results are also not satisfactory. These are some of the important issues faced by university students, and hence necessary action should be taken by the university. I believe that by framing certain rules and regulations for online classes, these rules and regulations could provide an alternate solution for both physical and mental well-being of students. Although online classes have very few negative impacts, based on my experience, online classes are proven to be effective in most cases. I would propose online classes for the future. The reasons are as follows. Online classes are proven to be effective for students who want to study abroad. Although cultural experiences are missed, online classes are could be effective for students who can't study abroad, who can't afford to study abroad, and by getting and at the same time by getting good education and doing it online. For example, one of my friends from India, she's a student in Seoul National University, is doing online classes for the past 3 semesters because of COVID, thereby reducing her living cost. Also, few of my friends have completed courses from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and Harvard University's courses, which on the other hand had to be done in person before COVID. I believe this approach could be applied to varieties of courses, which could be more flexible and affordable. Even after COVID, universities can join hands with government and business ventures by establishing education centers, sponsorship of technological devices by making it full-time, and making millions of students' dreams come true. Until now, knowledge-based education systems were observed, and the pandemic would change the design of education systems. The pandemic has given a beautiful opportunity to reevaluate ourselves, rethinking of which courses should the children be taught, such as courses needed for life, moral-based courses, and more importantly, the skills needed to be financially literate, thereby giving them self-dependency right from the childhood. One of my seniors is a data programmer, and she introduced to me this book called Rich Dad and Poor Dad, and explaining me how it is important for everyone to be financially literate rather than just focusing on grades. She also explained me how her company had various investment options and how she could have done it after graduation individually if she had known before. I believe in order to be financially literate, schools and universities should start offering customized business courses to all students irrespective of their major. This could actually create an impact on the students by encouraging them to create startup ideas, and this would reduce the unemployment rate, thereby promoting technological innovations. I'm an electrical engineering student, and I am taking other courses other than the engineering major, and I believe it's not useful to my major, useful to my career. So I believe that this is the time for the need to change to a personalization learning approach. Personalization learning approach is nothing but a student decides his own course at any time he wants. I believe this approach could increase the demands for skill-based learning and industry-based learnings. In this semester, I took a course called Engineering, Technology, and Society, where officials from Hyundai gave lectures and seminars about the company, and we were also given hands-on training with AI-based smart robotic camps and also presentation about startup ideas. I also took a graduate course where Samsung officials gave lectures about the Samsung and its management. Through these lectures, I was not only able to understand the key aspects of the companies, but also understood what the world demands in the latest technological innovations. Industries should start giving recommended course tracks for the students who want to be professional from very early age. Students also need to be allowed to take graduate courses and should provide wide array of internship and startup opportunities. Also, industries and companies should join hands with government organizations and business universities to provide healthy and employment benefits to the students, ensuring them confidence in the future. One good thing that COVID did to me in terms of online classes was I was able to allot my own personal time in developing my skills. Since I didn't have to move from classes to classes, and if I were in the campus, I developed a hobby by becoming interested in kayaking. Hence, I, along with my friend, learned some basic techniques and created a club called SNU Canoe Club. Until now, 14 members have joined the club. My friend Dominick cycles for almost like 100 kilometers once in a while, which promotes mental and physical well-being. By participating through such activities have made us express our leadership skills and active participation apart from academics. Hence, education should also be designed in such a way that it should not only help us develop professionally, but also help us develop other necessary skills needed for us in the future. The future of education depends upon the policies and laws created by the governments. The governments should ensure that education should create an impact on the society as a whole rather than focusing on one single entity or individual. We have seen what COVID has done to the humanity. Hence, let's realize ourselves and change for a better future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Naveen. Let me now introduce the co-chair of this session, who will take over and moderate the second half of the session. Professor Mi Hwa is in the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Kookmin University. And Professor Hong?
Thank you, Professor Kim, for your kind introduction. I'd like to guide your attention to our next presenter, Ms. Kiara TEGBE. Ms. Kiara is an exchange student from Sciences Po Paris in France. She's interested in public policy and she has been experiencing Korean college students' life in Mi Hwa Women's University for the past year. Kiara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor, for this introduction. So in this crisis, governments have been through a lot. And at all levels, at the global level, the local level, they were transformed in this crisis. In terms of policymaking, the very first policies implemented by governments were characterized by a growth of their intervention and authority, which might be revealing an ongoing process of centralization of power. And this is the very first topic we decided to tackle for this presentation. So measures implemented by governments were really confronting individual liberties. From my experience, the early March 2020 lockdown implemented in France was the first time I experienced my government's authority and control over my freedom of movement. At the global scale, I would say that government received a lot of backlash, but there's a diversity of responses according to countries. For example, in South Korea, 73.2% of citizens said that they were supporting the social distancing regulations implemented by the government. In France, 47% said that regulations were maybe too constraining. So these disparities in response might reflect how relevant citizens think governments and regulations are, how they perceive the powers, and also if there is more or less trust. In this crisis, the market economy has definitely been failing vulnerable population. When I say vulnerable population, I think about the youth, especially students who just graduated and were deeply hit at the very first stage of their economic independence. I'm thinking about minorities, and I'm thinking about lower social classes in general. So government had no choice but to take over the private sector function in terms of unemployment benefits, wage subsidies, or even healthcare. This leads us to the question of government's role in terms of social security, which leads us to the bigger question of the welfare states and what model has proven its efficiency in this crisis. Ultimately, there might be new ideologies, maybe favorable ones towards government's regulation of the economy and intervention, and maybe a shift further away from neoliberalism. So will government's role be reevaluated after this crisis? I think yes, definitely. So the very last point I wanted to tackle for centralization is accountability and accessibility. With the concentration of power, there might be a deeper marginalization of already marginalized voices, voices that are unheard in the public debate or from the decision-making process. And the link could be done with the ongoing growth of conspiracy theories and distrust towards powers and government in general under this COVID-19 crisis. The powers are accused of prioritizing political interest before citizen, economic revival before the containment of the disease, and thus making things worse in terms of public health. However, in my experience, I would say that when the pandemic hit, I found myself being in a very uncomfortable situation into the unknown. As a student, I didn't really know what to do, and I think that most of us felt like that, and the only thing we could do was to rely on our government, because I think we all thought that they knew better than us how to handle the situation. So the only thing we could do was to listen to regulation and follow instruction. And this might be reinforcing this whole centralization and big government making process. Well, centralization is the very first topic we wanted to tackle. A rapid digital transformation is the second, and we'll see that it can work toward reinforcing this whole centralization process, but also renewing the communication patterns between powers and citizens. The use of the contact tracing system is a real example of rapid digital transformation, enabling effectiveness. Through the use of the 3T strategy for tracing, testing, and treating by the South Korean government, a certain control was held over the spread of the virus at the very first stage of the pandemic. And this enabled the South Korean government to become a sort of model at the global level in terms of crisis management. Of course, there are disparities all around the world in terms of control and tracing of populations. But roughly speaking, I would say that a rapid digital transformation here in this case enabled control, but also an efficient policymaking process. Now, the way leaders perceive and receive information is through data. Data analysis and collection enables leaders to identify given issues and set a relevant policy agenda. After implementation for the policy assessment step, the real-time data analysis might enable an effectiveness of future policies. Now, about digital transformation and communication. So digital transformation enable new fundamentals in communication strategy. We are all more or less aware of the use of social medias by power government officials. But a few weeks ago, the French president went beyond what government have done so far. So recording himself with his phone, he challenged these two famous French YouTubers called McFly and Carlito. And the challenge was to film a music video about preventive behaviors regarding COVID-19. And if the video reached 10 million views, they would get the opportunity to film another video at the presidential palace. And it actually happened. So they filmed an anecdote contest with the President Emmanuel Macron. And this video ended with a heavy metal concert in the presidential garden. So how do we interpret this? For some, we are witnessing a progressive vulgarization and desacralization of institutions. For others, breaking the codes mean modernization of institutions, and the youth might also identify itself to these YouTubers and feel a kind of connection with the power and the institutions. For others, it is just a strategic move in regards to the 2022 presidential election. Now, although governments are getting bigger and there's a rapid digital transformation, this digital transformation might enable them to involve the public into the debates, the decision-making process through digital platforms. This might be the way the youth could share their experiences, view, thoughts, or feelings, and feel involved in the public debate. But when I think about the future, I can identify many risks associated with centralization and a rapid digital transformation. But the spectrum is wide, so I think governments might take shifts either toward digitized efficient democracies or digitized authoritarian powers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiara. Next, I present Mr. Jun Hong Min, and Mr. Jun Hong is a senior student majoring in economics and international relations at Seoul National University. I will give the floor to Mr. Jun Hong.
All right, thank you, Professor Hong. The life COVID has forced us into has large costs. We can't solve problems the ways we used to. And the more important problem is these costs have directly influenced people into financial difficulties on the brink of peril. Our system of self-help can no longer work. So now, for these new problems, the government needs to be the new solution. The COVID pandemic has sparked a complete breakdown of what we have known, and expectations and responsibilities of governments have changed rapidly around the world. It's a breakdown of the old normal governmental role. So then there comes this question. What sort of government is effective? What kind of government do we need to have? In this era of digitization and centralized authority, the government can do more for us under stricter responsibilities. As a young citizen, I rounded up aspects of what the future of government could look like and what it should look like. First of all, we need governments to be responsive. Governments need to be responsive to the needs of citizens. I'm leading on my life without much difficulty from the pandemic, but I have peers, friends in my generation who are not as lucky as I am. COVID has posed large costs on students. We have no more part-time jobs, no more internships, no more experiences abroad, no more socializing. We're becoming some sort of blank generation in which we don't have any more opportunities. I had a contest canceled last year due to COVID too. And as we've shown, mental health and education are also problems on their own. But the biggest problem is we're all left alone as individuals to cope through this crisis. Because administrative capability is concentrated on more urgent issues such as COVID response, so-called low priority issues are unattended to. But the problem is, these low priority issues are most likely the ones of the politically underrepresented, in this case, the young generation. In Korea, politicians are making far-fetched promises of giving out cash payments worth as much as $100,000. But this is the exact sort of naivety in policymaking that must change. The young generation has a diverse spectrum of agendas. We have different backgrounds, different interests, different perspectives. Listening to varying opinions, uncovering the roots of the problems that we face, and making policy approaches that can solve these problems cannot be done in such a rash manner. Problems need careful, detailed, and tailored approach. The government can become responsive. With the digital environment that we have and the centralized authority right now, the government can accumulate information and turn it into effective policy. So governments must reach out for those least equipped for participation, take sophisticated approaches when defining what public interest is, and turn those sorts of public interest into effective public policy in democratic settings. Second of all, we need a government that gives us hope in the form of fairness. Last year, I bought stocks. I was having FOMO, fear of missing out. I think many of you might know this word. I made about $1,000. But unfortunately, I didn't sell it when I had $1,000, so my balance is back to zero. But many of my friends, many in my generation, invested their assets in Bitcoin, in cryptocurrencies, in Dogecoin. But when you think about it, many of us wouldn't even have given so much as a look on Dogecoin, on GameStop, on these so-called meme stocks. But the fear of missing out took over. So is this because the young generation wants free lunches? Well, partly yes, but in my opinion, I dare say that this is because the hope of working our way up classes is diminishing. Lots of indicators have shown that the wealth gap has worsened with coronavirus. Those on the edge are the ones most likely to have their lifelines cut by COVID. Students who need to pay their tuition by working part-time have to mortgage 1 or 2 of their years, halt their education. And as life becomes online, people who don't have enough access to adequate digital environments lag behind in the digital divide. And studies suggest that generations that have been hit hard with whatever crisis in their early stages of economic independence tend to be left that way throughout the rest of their lives as a lagging generation. Well, according to the situation now, that's us, the young generation now. The fatal blow of COVID might have long-lasting consequences for us. So in this backdrop, what can government do for us? We can take hints from what the government did last year. Last year, there was large-scale governmental intervention in the economy around the globe. Public opinion was generally favorable to this sort of action, which is kind of a surprise because we were living in a neoliberal world where, according to Ronald Reagan, government is the problem, not the solution. But what we're seeing now is we're starting to see that governments can be the solutions to problems that people are facing. That the government can actively respond to problems with the concentrated authority in the digitized environment that we're facing right now. I believe this is the start of the debate about the new normal. Most of us are dissatisfied with this polarized world in which a few rake money with Bitcoin and stocks, while lots of us work for wages that can't even pay enough for housing. So that's why the government has a responsibility to give us hope by fostering fairness in the economy, in the new normal. Fairness as in giving hope that we can be compensated for a better life if we put in more effort. The government, with its increased authority and legitimacy, has the potential, the ability to switch the polarization trend now to a world in which there is opportunity to step upward, in which we can be compensated not for our backgrounds nor our luck, but for the work we do, the effort that we put in. Earlier this month, an agreement between the finance ministers of the G7 agreed upon the improvisation of the current corporate tax system, in which they would implement a new global minimum corporate tax. I don't know what this is going to head into, but this might be the very first stepping stone of reversing the polarization trend of the old normal into a new normal. Last but not least, we need responsible governments. Debt levels of governments have risen rapidly as a result of governments pouring in liquidity in the market. This can easily become unsustainable. We might be mortgaging our future. And it's not hard to think that our generation might become the biggest victims of this Ponzi scheme. This is not to say that government expenditure or government debt is bad in itself. It's to say that government involvement is essential, especially for a fair society. But this is about accountability, about sustainable governance regard to debt and how the government uses it. Digitization and power concentration is rendering government a more powerful force. With these developments come responsibilities: safe handling of personal information, preventing political interests from exploiting the concentrated information and power, creating social consensus for limiting the limits of governmental power. So COVID has brought along digitization and concentrated power in government. With more power comes more accountability. So institutional means to foster sustainability, to foster responsibility must be implemented, as well as close monitoring by civil society. But in the end, it's up to us citizens to be aware of our rights and to make government accountable. We have to take action to make government listen to what citizens need in this era of change into the new normal. In the digitized, centralized new normal, the government must commit to keeping essential democratic values and principles such as liberty of speech, privacy, and liberty to action. And it must take the wider responsibilities that the new normal will endow. Thank you.
Thank you, Jun Hong. Our next presenter is Ms. Colleen MUTURI. Ms. Coco is from Kenya, and she is now studying energy resource engineering at Seoul National University. Coco, the floor is yours.
Thank you for introduction, Professor, and to Jejuporum for a chance to speak. Before I begin, a small trigger warning. Now, what has changed? The pandemic has changed our lives in fundamental ways. It has changed how we work, it has changed how we learn, it has changed how we interact with each other. And in terms of social activism, there have been a few cases around the world of people adapting to the measures set in place to control the virus. For instance, in April 2020, Israel showed us what a socially distant protest could look like. On Earth Day last year, the youth held a 72-hour-long live-streamed digital march with over 200,000 people in attendance. However, in most parts of the world, social activism and protesting still looks the same, with people taking the streets in masses to fight for their causes because, let's face it, what is a virus if you're at risk just by the virtue of the color of your skin, your gender, or your sexual orientation? The biggest way in which COVID has impacted social activism is that it has highlighted the issues that already plagued our society. In short, it showed us how sick society was even before the virus. People were forced to stay at home, people were forced to have more free time, and people were forced to pay attention. Today, I shall be speaking about a few issues that have been especially exacerbated by COVID, and I shall be speaking as a woman and specifically as a woman of color. In May 2020, this video went viral. The murder of George Floyd, a Black man while in the custody of a white police officer. The video garnered over 1.4 billion views worldwide, and it triggered one of the biggest protests in American history since the days of the Civil Rights Movement. and the hashtag Black Lives Matter went viral, being retweeted on an average of 3.7 million times daily in the times of unrest, becoming the second most retweeted hashtag of 2020. The American protests shone light on police brutality all around the world. Where I come from, Kenya. At the wake of the pandemic, the police had killed more Kenyans than COVID had. And in March 2020, this boy, 13-year-old Yasin Moyo, was killed by a stray bullet while on the balcony of his family home in Nairobi, Kenya, as the police was enforcing the COVID curfew. And at the same time of the Black Lives Matter protests, Kenyans were in the streets protesting against police brutality, a bit west of the continent in Nigeria. 20-year-old Chukwu Ebuka was playing soccer with his friends when it got a bit late, and he was shot dead by police, again, enforcing the COVID curfew. Later in the year, a video went viral of a SARS officer shooting a man dead in his car, throwing the body out and driving away in the dead man's vehicle. And after this video, the End SARS movement gained traction, not just in Nigeria, but all around the world. A bit down south in South Africa, where race is not just black and white. 16-year-old Nathaniel Julius, a colored boy, was shot so many times by police that his mother couldn't count the number of gunshot wounds in his body. And in South Africa, we have a movement called the Colored Lives Matter movement, again, protesting against police brutality. Even before the pandemic, police brutality was a big issue, and it's not just a matter of violence. It's a matter that's deeply steeped in racism. Xenophobia, and specifically xenophobia, became especially rife as a result of the pandemic. The first case of COVID was reported in Wuhan, China, and because of this, people of Asian descent have been treated with malice worldwide. This is a restaurant in downtown Seoul with a sign on it that says "No Chinese allowed," something that was adapted by various establishments around the country and later extended to all foreigners. People of Asian descent have been subject to verbal abuse, they have been subject to physical abuse, and the most intense was the recent Atlanta shootings, where a white man opened fire in 3 massage parlors, killing 8 people, 6 of whom are of Asian descent. And here we see the Stop Asian Hate movement gaining traction, not just in America, but all around the world, because the anti-Asian hate seen throughout the pandemic follows a long history of violence and prejudice against people of Asian descent. It is important to note that in the case of the Atlanta shootings, the man responsible, on being questioned of his motive, he claimed to have a sexual addiction. And because he could not control his urges, 6 women had to die. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 3 women faces a form of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, with intimate partner violence being the most rampant. In the year before the pandemic, 243 million women aged 15 to 49 faced a form of physical or sexual abuse by an intimate partner. In the UK, within the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, the rate of femicides in the home had doubled. UN Women describes violence against women in COVID-19 as a shadow pandemic, a pandemic within a pandemic. Furthermore, there has been a flood of reports of increased child marriages, cyberbullying, sexual harassment, and sexual violence. As a result of COVID, there's a greater need for social activism for women because we are fighting for even the most basic right, the right to live. Before I finish, I think it's important that I mention something on gender inequality. The following is some data obtained from the European Union. 76% of the 49 million care workers is female. These are those who are most exposed to the virus, hence that's a greater risk. 84% of working women aged 15 to 64 are employed in the service sector, which includes the main areas hit by COVID. They are at a greater risk of unemployment. Even before COVID, gender inequality was a big issue. However, COVID has tipped the scale even further, and the impact may be long-term. And again, we are fighting for equality because of COVID. Where I come from, we say, mwenye macho hambi witazama, and it means he who has eyes is not told to look. COVID-19 has been a time of great difficulty for us all. It is, after all, a pandemic. However, imagine being the subject of racial discrimination in a pandemic. Imagine being a woman in a pandemic. Imagine being both in a pandemic. I hope that this presentation gives you something to think about. And in the words of the late Martin Luther King, life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Thank you.
Thank you, Coco. Our last but not the least panelist is Ms. Naama Ben-Ami. Ms. Naama is from the United States with Israeli heritage, and she now studies linguistics at Korea University. I'll give you Ms. Naama Ben-Ami.
Thank you, Professor. So, we heard about all of these struggles worldwide, exacerbated by the pandemic. So what do we do next? Well, suffering caused due to the pandemic does not go away with the pandemic, and we still have to be active, especially now that the world is beginning to move on. But how do we do that? The way I see it, there are two possible futures, a desired future and a likely future. The desired future is quite simple. We would want everyone to get educated, listen to others, and find a personal connection with all of these issues that impact everybody. However, there is the likely future. I think misinformation will start spreading at even more rapid rates. This is caused due to mostly social media such as Twitter, Instagram, and fake news. Additionally, I see an increase in slacktivism, which is the practice of activism only as a front. I also see protests becoming less cool, meaning people will find less of a reason to attend protests. The reason I think this future is more likely is because we are already seeing it happen. People are losing interest. Here you can see a Google Trends page showing the results for Palestine. As you can see, there was a huge spike when earlier this year, tensions between Israel and Palestine have reached new heights. However, sadly, almost immediately after, we see a sharp decrease. And this is not a unique situation. Palestine is not alone in this. The Black Lives Matter movement also gained traction, followed immediately after the murder of George Floyd. However, shortly after, interaction with the hashtag and with the search term quickly diminished. The same can be said about Asian hate. We see a huge spike of search terms related to Asian hate and then a quick downfall. But why do we think this is happening? Well, I think this all points to something rather unpleasant. The future of our communities looks bleak. However, there is something that we can do. The first step is to learn. We need to get educated and involved. Online sources now more than ever are readily available at the snap of a finger. Additionally, signing petitions, attending live streams, and participating online has become easier than ever in such a globalized world. Additionally, we have many different news sources across the political spectrum, and we can get out of our echo chambers with just a simple search term. The next step is to simply listen. Marginalized voices are constantly spoken over. It is our responsibility to actually listen, and rather than prioritize what we have to say, listen to those who are actually suffering. The next step is caring, avoiding slacktivism, which I mentioned earlier, as well as activism as an aesthetic. Rather than thinking, this will make me look good, we have to actually care about what we want to advocate for. We need to really read about these problems rather than quickly skimming. This will prevent misinformation spreading and will stop the increase of fake news that we see in recent years. The next step is finding a personal connection. We all know somebody or are somebody that is impacted by one of the many issues we talked about today. Finding a personal connection can be as easy as speaking to somebody who is directly impacted by these movements. Finding somebody in our immediate circle means that we know exactly what the people who are part of a marginalized community are going through. Finding this personal connection will get us more involved and get us to really care about these issues rather than stay at the surface level. The next step is to immerse ourselves. There are struggles all over the world in every continent, and we need to really immerse ourselves into all of these struggles and learn more about other people. Some of the struggles we mentioned today include Black Lives Matter, gender-based violence, as well as other struggles that were not as mentioned, such as Myanmar or the occupation of Palestine. The next thing we can do is improve our daily habits. A little bit of education about many topics goes a long way. And by that I mean learning a little every single day will already make a significant improvement in the way we perceive the world. It's easy to stay in our bubbles and our echo chambers, but if we just want to read a little bit every day, sign one petition every day, that would make a huge impact for all the people who can't do that. The next step, the final step, is spreading. So now that we've learned all we can about other struggles, rather even at just a surface level, now we're ready to talk to other people. All of us have our own little echo chambers, which are just spaces that are filled with people who think like us. We need to speak to people who are less informed. Talking to a like-minded individual again and again about things that we all agree on is not going to make an actual impact. What will make an impact is calling out the people in your life who are saying harmful and perpetuating harmful stereotypes or other ideas that we know to be wrong. The thing I want to really emphasize is that we need to practice activism IRL, even in small ways. Activism in real life doesn't have to look like protests as much as they do work. Activism in real life includes even donating to causes that we care about. It includes doing food drives, doing product boycotts, such as supporting the BDS movement for Palestine, and so many other things that we can do. There's always something that we can do. Remember, it is better to do something rather than nothing. And if there is one thing you take from my presentation today, is I urge you to start doing even just a little bit more every day for the people who can't. Thank you.
Thank you, Naama and other student panelists, excellencies, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to take part in the youth session of Jejuforum 2021 for sustainable peace and inclusive prosperity. I just wanted to give a special thanks to our president, Choi Byung-il of the Korea Foundation for Advanced Studies, who initially came up with this idea for our entire session and has provided all the support throughout the process. Let's give a big applause to him. The Korea Foundation for Advanced Studies has initiated and launched this global student project at Jejuforum for the first time in the foundation's history. Because of the inherent nature of the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was forced to lock down for the past year. Nevertheless, we thought that there must be a way to reach out to students around the world and make connections with them. And then we paid special attention to students who happened to be stuck in Korea and who had to go through the global crisis in this particular territorial part of the globe. Fortunately, we got to have such a diverse group of students from the world. We believe they can represent voices of the young generation, the times or we would call the class of COVID-19. Every generation during their lifetime is hit by at least one major shock to world system or national system, which will fundamentally shift the way people perceive, live, and interact, and the way one individual dreams and shapes his or her own life. It was the 1987 democratization for Professor Kim, and it was the 1997 Asian financial crisis to me, and it was the 9/11 in 2001 for somebody in this room. It is the 2020 COVID-19 for the college students now. With the rapid development and distribution of vaccines, the world is now cautiously talking about a recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our student speakers call the world's attention to listen to their story and vision for the better post-COVID world. They refuse to remain as a passive recipient of public policies. They rather claim their agency in shaping the future world. They carefully and critically go over what they are really going through right now as a cohort of COVID-19 and what it implies to themselves and to their societies. They stressed the importance of mental health for an individual and called for a more personalized and tailored higher education that meets individual needs and career aspirations. They want more of responsive government's action for fair societies, but at the same time, they warn governments that they'll be watching them and hold governments accountable for actions and inaction. These young minds have witnessed what COVID-19 revealed and intensified the existing social problems, such as so much hatred and discrimination, inequality, and violence towards the vulnerable. These young minds do not hesitate to call their fellow college students and peers to take concrete individual action for change, based on compassion, empathy, and solidarity. Tonight, we found and offered a small platform for these young great minds to speak up. And it is now the world's turn to listen to them and embrace them in shaping the post-COVID future. I thank you and have a good night.
네, 고맙습니다. 진에게 수고해주신 두 분 공동 자장님들께 여러분 다시 한번 따뜻한 박수 부탁을 드리겠습니다. 네, 고맙습니다. 아울러 이번 세션을 위해서 정말 열심히 또 준비를 해주셨는데요. 8분의 패널분들께도 여러분 다시 한번 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. Thank you very much for your presentations. 네, 이렇게 다채로운 의견과 더불어서 우리 청년들이 느끼고 있는 팬데믹의 오늘 하나하나 또 공유를 해주셨는데요. 이 코로나 학번이라는 말은 참 안타깝고 슬프지만 우리 청년들의 에너지와 함께 거뜬히 이겨낼 수 있지 않을까. 우리 추억 속으로 사라지는 그날이 금방 오지 않을까 또 기대가 됩니다. 자, 이렇게 저희 네 번째 세션을 마무리하도록 하겠습니다. 역시 이번 세션을 마무리하면서 한 장면으로 남겨보도록 하죠. 누구보다 열심히 이번 세션 참여를 하고 계신 우리 비주얼 존에 계신 비주얼 띵킹으로 마무리해보도록 하겠습니다. 보여주시죠. 자, 이번 세션의 마무리는 그래요. 저희가 또 준비가 되면 만나보도록 하겠습니다. 자, 이렇게 저희는 세션을 마무리하고 이어서 마지막 세션 만나보도록 하겠습니다. 마지막 세션은 둥지 탈출 넘버원 청년 주거의 실태 그리고 미래 방향성이라는 주제로 진행을 해보도록 하겠습니다. 여러분 끝까지 많은 관심 부탁드리겠습니다. 저희는 잠시 휴식 후에 다시 인사드리겠습니다.